Rachel, thank you so much for joining us today, and thank you for being here. Could you tell us a little bit more about your project, Variations Down the Line?
Yeah, well, thank you, John. I'm really excited to be here as well, giving the world premiere of Variations Down the Line, and also really grateful to Jam on the Marsh, who have co-commissioned the project. Without them, it wouldn't have been possible. So Variations Down the Line is a project which has commissioned 5 composers, Samuel Becker, Julian Broughton, Nicola Lefanu, Alison Kay and Michael Finnessy, to each write a set of 3 variations based on Bach's Goldberg variations, and they'll be interspersed into the Bach.
So what drew you originally to the Bach Goldberg variations?
Well, it's a piece I listened to quite a lot as a student, and I often had it on in the background. I always loved listening to it, and I think the idea just gradually grew in my mind. Oh, maybe I should learn it one day. And then I sort of found myself at some point with a little bit of extra time on my hands, so I started learning it and submitted myself to play it in Brighton Fringe, and then went for it. It went down pretty well, so I carried on playing it.
Most people might know the name Bach and Goldberg variations together, but they might not know the history of the piece and also maybe where the name came from. If you could expound a little upon that.
Okay, well, we don't really know exactly why Bach wrote the Goldberg variations, but we know he met Count Keyserling, who was the Russian ambassador in Dresden, and Keyserling rewarded Bach with a golden goblet containing 100 golden coins, which was the largest reward Bach received for any single composition. So whether it was a direct commission or not, we don't know. As for Goldberg variations, that was actually a name that became attached to it way after Bach had died. It began because there was a rumour started by a musicologist called Forkel in the 19th century that Keyserling had commissioned it so that Goldberg, who was a very good harpsichord player, would play it to him to while away his insomnia. And so it's a very nice tale, but apparently there's absolutely no evidence to back it up at all. But nevertheless, the name Goldberg has stuck.
And with it, there's the variations. Could you tell us how many variations there are and what links the variations together?
Yes, so there's 30 variations. It kind of splits into 2 halves of 15 in each half. And they're all based on the opening aria, especially based on the chords and bass lines. So I'll just play that to you now. So they both repeat, which is called, in music we call it binary form. And the other thing that links the variations is they fall into sets of 3. So the first in each set of 3, so that's variations 1, 4, 7 and so on, is free in form. So, for example, Bach writes a jig, an adagio, a fugue and so on. And the second in each set of 3 is a toccata. What that basically means is it's a lot of fast notes, usually to challenge the performer or perhaps to show them off, depending on your perspective. And this is where it's perhaps most relevant that it was written not for a piano. Piano didn't yet exist. It was written for a 2-manual harpsichord, so a harpsichord which would have had 2 keyboards. And it would have been very easy on a harpsichord with 2 keyboards to do a lot of hand crossing and even play the same note at the same time. It's a bit more challenging on 1 manual piano, sadly. So we have to find creative ways around these challenges. And the third in each set is a canon, which, as you may know, means you hear a tune and then you hear the same tune a short while afterwards following behind. So there are 9 canons in all, and nearly all of them are 3 parts, so 2 parts accompanied by a bass line.
Could you give a demonstration of the canon so we could hear the different lines come in?
Sure, so I'll just play a little bit of the first canon, which is variation number 3. So you hear this tune. So I'll show you how that all fits together. But in fact, the Bach goes one step further because he doesn't just write canons which just use the same notes. So the second canon, variation 6, is a canon at the second, and the third canon, variation 9, is a canon at the third. What that means is that the second part to enter enters an interval of a third higher or lower. So I'll show you how that works. So you hear, with variation 9, you hear... And then the second part enters a third lower, so 2 notes lower. And then if we put them together, we get this. Can I just tell you one more thing? I hope you're finding the canons as interesting as me. The next canon, number 12, is not just a canon at the fourth, it's also an inverted canon. So that means instead of the melody going down and then up, it goes up and then down. So we hear... And then in answer to that, we hear... So that's an inverted canon at the fourth. And at the same time, of course, Bach's keeping the same chords and bass line, so it's pretty clever stuff. So he really was a bit of a master of what we call counterpoint. That's when all the parts are equally important and weaving in and out of each other, and you'll hear that in a lot of the other variations as well.
That's great, Rachel. Just moving back to the project variations down the line, could you give us, what gave you this idea for the project? It's, unusual to have for the tamper with the Bach-Goldberg variations is often thought of as a standalone set. So what was kind of this idea to commission these new composers?
Well, I was running a workshop with some 16 to 19-year-old students at the East Sussex Academy of Music in Lewes, where I work. And I gave a little talk about the piece and some demonstrations, and then they got into small groups and they created their own improvisations and compositions based on the chords and bass line which I played you just earlier. And they created some really great pieces, and I thought, oh, it's really refreshing to hear these chords. Much, of course, I love the Bach as well, but it's lovely to hear them in a 21st century idiom. So I just thought, oh, maybe I should take this project a little bit further, and I chatted it through with a few colleagues who seemed to think it was a good idea.
That's great. And how did you go about choosing the number of composers that you commissioned, and how did you actually go about finding composers?
Well, I chose 5 because I wanted to do the sets of 3 that we talked about earlier. That was a really important part of the brief. And because they fall into the 2 sets of 15, really, it would be like creating another whole set. So that's why I wanted 5 composers. I wanted a mixture of styles, composers I had worked with and hadn't worked with, well-known composers, less well-known composers, male and female composers. But most importantly, I wanted them to be composers who I knew were very comfortable with counterpoint, because I feel that's such an important part of Bach's style. If they're
connecting it to the Bach variations. What was the composer's brief? Because often when a commissioner asks a composer to write something, you give them kind of instructions, etc., for what you want them to write. What did you ask of the composers?
Yeah, so my original idea was for the variations to be based upon the chords and bass line. And many of them have done that, but also some of them felt that wouldn't work for their style of composing if they, for example, they write more atonally. So all of them have used the structure of the 3 variations. The first one, free choice, but obviously based on the Bach. The second one, toccata, and the third one, the canon. So that's the brief that everyone has done, and then they've all adapted other aspects of the Bach in different ways.
Could you give an example of how it does relate to the Bach? Because it is a different time period, and it does sound different. But could you just give us an example of the keyboard of how they are connected and something we can listen to? So
Samuel Becker, that's the first set you'll hear after variation 6. He has stuck very strictly to the chords and the bass line. He's created a very grand piece. It reminds me a little bit of the beginning of the second part as well, which is a grand French overture. So I'll just play you a little bit. Hudson has kind of taken lots of different aspects of the Bach and put his own stamp on it. So his first variation is a saraband, which is based upon the aria. I'll just play you a few bars of that. I'll just tell you a little bit about the first one because she uses a very interesting technique where you hold notes down silently. So they're related to the key of the piece, which is G major. But as you use the right hand, it activates those harmonies. I'll just show you.
That's great because you can hear the ringing of the chords in the air.
Yeah, it's really nice actually playing it in a church because the resonance works. And in fact, she specifies that the tempo should be adapted if it's in a drier acoustic, maybe playing it a bit faster. So, Michael Finnessy wanted very much to base his variations on specific variations of the Bach. So he's written a set of 3 variations which are based on variations 19 to 21. So I'll play them obviously after 21. So I'll just show you how that works. So we hear a little bit, I'll play you a bit of the minuet, variation 19. And this is his response. And so on. So just gives you a bit of a flavour. A lot of cross rhythms, so but very contrapuntal as well.
A question for you, Rachel, something we haven't talked about was with the Bach Goldberg variations, it's quite demanding for a pianist.
Yeah.
And many different things from just even slow playing could be hard, but also the fast, intricate contrapuntal sections. With these new pieces, could you maybe give an example of something that's really challenging to play that you found a challenge to really get into? Is there a section of it, one of the pieces? And what that might be, whether it's rhythm, whether it's a textural
I could play you a little bit maybe of Michael Finnessy's Toccata, which is based on the variation 20, which is a very kind of cheeky, playful one. And he's written, I'd maybe even show the camera, you've got the melody notes and then lots of little notes going along with it. And he's left quite a lot to the interpretation exactly where I put those notes, but it's been quite a challenge to learn. So.
Fantastic.
So, that was definitely one of the most challenging ones to learn. Thanks, Michael.
That's great.
And then I'll just play you a little bit of Alison, also based hers on a few different variations. And the first one's based on the aria, but I'll show you how her toccata works really cleverly because it's based on variation 25, which is the third minor one. It's very chromatic, it almost uses quite different harmonies really. It's the only one that does stray from the harmony. So I'll just play you the beginning of 25. Taken all of those notes in the same order and created a toccata out of it. So I hope that gives you a little bit of a flavour of all of the sets of variations.
With any project, there's always challenges. And in this time, with COVID-19, except there's even more challenges going on with the arts. Could you just discuss what you've found and how you've gotten around those challenges to bring this together today?
Yeah, well, it has been quite a journey. It's a project I've kind of been working on for about 5 years, actually. So it started from that initial idea, and obviously the next challenge was to find funding. And somebody put me in touch with Jam Festival, so I met with Ed Armitage, and he was really excited about the project. So I'm incredibly grateful because he offered to co-commission it, and that really helped put the project on the map. After that, I launched a crowdfunder campaign and we met our target of £2,000 in 4 weeks, which was really exciting. And then we formed an organisation called Resoundings and got more funding from the Hinrichsen Foundation. So all of these things have really helped to make it possible. We wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for that. In fact, we didn't know if we would be here today, because that's another challenge, of course, is the timing of this project. So it was a slight advantage from a personal point of view that I had a bit of extra time to learn the new variations, because I wasn't quite sure how I was going to fit it all in. But obviously, that aside, it's not been an easy time for lots of people. And we didn't know, having received all these variations and I was learning them, thinking, but I don't even know if we're going to be able to perform it. So it's really amazing that Jam has managed to pull off this virtual festival. I'm really grateful to them for making it possible. And probably from a personal point of view, it's been quite good to have a lockdown project. And for me, it's been this.
What aspirations do you have for the future?
We're hoping to do, we've got more performances booked, obviously. One of them, Hurst Festival, will be happening virtually. Some of them are being postponed. And of course, we want to organise more performances of variations. But also, I'm working with some music animateurs, Steve Dummer and Fraser Traynor, and also Coma Sussex, which is contemporary music for all. And we've got a package of workshops which we'd love to offer you when it's safe to do so, of course. And it will be open to people of all abilities, and will help you to create your own Goldberg variation. Other than that, another thing that came up in the brief was because we want the project, the variations to have a legacy, we thought it was important they were going to be accessible to student pianists and amateur pianists. So most of them are grade 8 and under, so grade 5 to 8 standard. So we hope that lots of other people will enjoy playing and listening to them, and of course we'd love to make a recording of them as well.
That's great, Rachel. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you.
And we look forward to hearing and watching your concert online.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.